Well, this week has been a tumultuous week, so we need to ask the question, why so many problems? Well, let's look at what God said at first, and if people would have followed this from the beginning, we wouldn't be where we are today. But since God has given free moral agency and he wants us to choose, he set before us life and death, blessing and cursing, and that's noted in Genesis, the first part of the Bible. Let's turn there for a minute and look at just a couple of simple things that would keep us out of a whole lot of trouble, okay? Because in using free moral agency, and God wants free moral agency because he doesn't want robots. Now today, men are all excited with AI and robots. Okay? Turn off the electricity and it's over. All right? Now, let's come to Genesis, the first chapter. And we need to have this because, as we will see, the religious leaders are the ones who are creators of the problems today. Verse 26, first basic statement of God, which tells us who made us, why we're here, and also gives us some preliminary instructions on what we are to do. Let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Well, we have a book that is called From a Speck of Dust to a Son of God, because the Bible tells us that dust you are and dust you're going to return to, and that's just the way that it is. And the only one who has overcome that has been Christ. Okay? And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that crawls upon the earth. Well, have we had dominion over everything? Yes, we have. And how has that turned out? Just like God said, combination of good and evil. But evil always overcomes and prevails because there's also Satan, the devil. Verse 27, and God created man in his own image, in the image of God created he them, male and female. Now, everything about our bodies has to do with how God made us. And every cell in our being and subcells and everything else have our genetic, as we know today, chromosomes for men and for women. And down through time, there have been those men who wanted to become women and women who wanted to become men, and it never worked out. Okay? Now notice how we started out. And everyone wants this. They don't want the difficulties and problems that we have today. But let's see how it started. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of heaven, and over every creeping thing that creates upon the earth. Okay? Now then, he says he made all of the plants to reproduce themselves. And that's a big lesson that God wants us to learn. Okay? Now, what we have right here in Genesis, the first chapter, are what you would call overall definitions of the goal of God and human beings. Okay? Rest of the Bible fills us in on the details, how we came to where we are today, and how we go to where we need to be in the future. Okay? Now let's look at something here in chapter 2. Let's look at the first law given to Adam and Eve. Okay? Chapter 2. Verse 1. Thus the heavens of the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And by the beginning of the seventh day, God finished his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he has made. Now the seventh day is in creation, Genesis 1:14, as well as the holy days. So bottom line, if anyone wants to change the day of worship, they must change the creation of God, because he's not going to change it. Okay? So this is the first law, the Sabbath. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, made it holy by his presence with Adam and Eve right in front of him. And he rested from all his work which God has made. Okay? Now then, let's look at the first couple of commands. Okay? The first command was, after God had created the Garden of Eden, he told Adam, you are to dress it and keep it. You're to work. Okay? Now then, we come to God creating Eve. Now, he says it's not good for a man to be alone, so he make a helpmate. Okay. Now, let's look at the next commandment that God gave. Verse 22. Then God made, after he took the rib, which he had taken out of a man into a woman, and he brought her to him. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of me. Now here is the command. For this reason, now I want you to stop and think of how many problems would be automatically solved in the world with this one commandment right here. Automatically solved. Because, see, all the laws of God and everything that God has done and made are automatic, and they work without him having to do anything, because he put the process in motion in what he created. Now, here it is. For this reason, shall. That comes with every commandment. Shall a man leave his father and mother? So then they knew there would be other men and women and children and everything like that. And shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Now think about that. If today all men and all women believed God, followed God, kept his commandments, and this particular one right here, husband and wife. Okay? Because as we will see, one of the key things of going against God is that it comes to all kinds of licentious sex. And that's a problem and a difficulty that comes with it. And we have all the difficulties that come upon us. Okay? So, let's look in Leviticus 18. Now, let's see some of the things, because after the fall and after all of that, then we have the commandments given by God and what to do and what not to do, and what he told the children of Israel, and how he would be with them, before them, etc. And he also told them another very specific thing. He said that he would fight for them against whatever enemies were, if they would obey him. And we know from the history in the Bible, when they didn't obey God, and they went out to war, even in the name of God and with the ark of God that God gave to Israel, they lost. Okay? And many troubles ensued after that. We won't get into it. If just the commands right here that we're going to look at in Leviticus 18, 19, and 20, we're not going to go through it word for word. If these commands were kept, think of how many problems would be solved. See? Like today, we all want freedom, but you cannot have total freedom without God's laws. Look at what it's led to. See? Here, I've got this article. I showed it to you before. I'll show it again. Transgender pastor claims Bible wasn't written for 2024. Okay? So we will see a little later who God holds primarily responsible, and then secondarily, and right on down to us. Okay? Here's what God said, Leviticus 18, to the children of Israel, which follows right along with that very first command: a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they two shall become one flesh. That's an overall universal command for all people everywhere on the face of the earth. Period. Okay? And there are laws that God gave, which even if the people do not know about those laws, they still function against them. Here's what he told the children of Israel. Verse 1, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now, don't anyone come and say that this was written by Moses and he designed all of this himself. Moses was a spokesman for God, and he spoke the words that God said to speak. One little sidebar. What if you do something that God said don't do? Okay, remember the two sons of Aaron? God said with the fire here, I started the fire. It is to be kept burning for all sacrifices, so everyone would know that this fire was from me. Okay? So what did they do? They let it go out. So they said, oh, well, we'll get some wood and start a new fire. So they did, and zap, God struck them dead. You don't disobey God and defy God and take your own devices to try and correct the problem. Lesson right from that. Many different things. Okay? Speak to the children of Israel and say, I am the Lord your God. As they do in the land of Egypt where you dwell, you shall not do. And you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan where I am bringing you, neither shall you walk in their ordinances. You shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. So God is saying, now look, here is the way of life that you are to live. See? People want to know, what do I do? How do I live? You know, a baby is born into the world if it bypasses abortion. And what does it know? Nothing. God intended mother and father to teach the children, etc., etc. He gave the commands here. We won't get into that right now. Okay? But this is the way of life. You shall keep my statutes and judgments, which if a man do, or does, he shall live in them. I am the Lord. Now, great mistake of Protestantism, saying the law is abolished and you don't have to keep it. Okay? The truth is, if you keep the laws of God, you receive blessings. If you don't keep the laws of God, you receive punishments. And if that doesn't correct you, then you receive curses. And if that doesn't correct you, you receive death. On an individual basis, on a family basis, on a community basis, on a national basis, on a worldwide basis as we have today. Okay? Then it says, all the laws concerning incest, father, mother, daughter, son, all of that. Now it says in verse 22, and this is the problem we have today. See? Now, a lot of people think that the laws of God in the Old Testament are harsh. The law itself is love. The punishment is harsh. Here's a fundamental command that is violated by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in the world. You shall not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. And some idiots in examining the Bible say, well, it's not a sin, it's an abomination. Well, for your information, an abomination is an absolute heinous sin, worse than a just transgression. Then it says, you shall not lie with any animals. Defile yourself. Okay? Don't do that. He says, therefore, verse 24, do not defile yourself in any of these things, for all these, the nations which I cast out from before you, are defiled. So what is God saying here? And this judgment carries over to every nation and every people. When you have homosexuality and sins come along that defy husband and wife, family and children, teaching of God's way, you are kicked out of the land, destroyed and don't exist. He said the land is defiled, therefore I visit the wickedness against it, okay, because the land itself vomits out those who live in it. Everything happens. Drought, no water, crops fail. Everything goes wrong. Okay? That's what happens. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments. You shall not commit any of these abominations, neither the native nor the stranger who lives among you. And the men of the land who were here before you have done all these abominations, and the land is defiled. You shall not do these things so that the land may not spew you out when you defile it, as it is spewed out the nations that were before you. Okay? So God raises up nations and takes them down. How close have we recently come to really being suffering the tremendous penalties of God? Very close. Maybe there are enough people that God is going to hold back. We'll see for a little bit. But there is still the great sin that is yet to be judged against us, which will be coming. I'll cover that in a bit. Then he says, chapter 19. Okay. Let's see how important that this becomes and how this ties in with what? Genesis 2. Right here. Chapter 19 and verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, You shall be holy. Now, what does that mean? That means you keep the commandments of God. Because why? They're holy commandments. They're holy judgment. They're holy statutes. They're holy precepts. If you don't believe it, read out Psalm 119. Okay? You shall each man revere his mother and his father and keep my Sabbath. There you go. Commandment 4 and commandment 5. But notice, he put mother and father first. 4 children. Right? Okay. So there are times when God does not keep the 10 commandments in straight chronological order. He does in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. Then he emphasizes this, I, God, am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols. Make molten gods. That's the second commandment. Then it talks about sacrificing peace offerings and so forth. All right. Let's come to Leviticus 19. Let's see what we have today. Leviticus 19 and verse 29. You shall not prostitute your daughter to cause her to become a whore. That's what we've done in America under the guise of freedom. You can do anything you want. Well, that's true. You can do anything you want. But how do you want your life to turn out? Why do we have so much mental disease, spiritual disease, physical disease? Okay. Now notice, lest the land fall to whoredoms, and that's what we have today. That is the great sin. Now, there are some few religious leaders speaking against it. There's even one school superintendent in the state of Oklahoma who says that they will read the Bible in the schools. See? That's a good thing. Now notice what happens. That the land become full of wickedness. Do we have that today? And what sort of things are we facing? Now notice what he follows up again. Notice again how this ties in with what? Genesis 2 and 3. All right? Verse 30. You shall keep my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Okay? Now, here's what also we need to see. Chapter 20 tells the penalty that they were to inflict upon those who sinned these sins that we have just covered. See? Now today, you say, oh, well, that'll be harsh. You know, these two homosexuals, well, they love each other. And look at their nice people. See? So we tolerate them. And then they seduce more and more and more and more and more. And what do you have? Look at San Francisco. Started in New York, came to Los Angeles, came to San Francisco, and now it's everywhere. All expecting the blessings of God because we have free moral agency and we're going to do what we want to do. Okay. So how do you solve the problem of unwanted pregnancies? That's why God says, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and his wife is to cleave to him. And together they bring children in the world, which are the flesh combined of mother and father, the genes from both. See, And that all goes back to Adam and Eve because all the genes were put in Adam and Eve at the time and carries right on down to today. So it's like it says in Psalm 139 about what God is doing in the womb. He is forming a new human being. See? And if you go to Jeremiah the first time, God says to Jeremiah, I knew you before you were formed, which means that he knew that Jeremiah would be the prophet he would choose at the instant of conception. And at the instant of conception, regardless of how it comes about, that new life receives the spirit of man from God because God determined that's what he would do at that point. Okay? Now then, today, and this has been a problem, there's been fights back and forth and in the court and out of the court and so forth concerning abortion. And when Roe versus Wade was overturned, a lot of people got real excited and say, oh, what a great thing, we overturned Roe versus Wade. No, you didn't. You just transferred it to the states. See? Now, what have the states done? Well, there are a couple of states that don't want abortions. There are many states that want a lot of abortions, and there are a few states that will have any abortions even to murder after birth. But it's murder from conception. Now, let's look and see what happened. Abortions. As of early 2024, the United States has seen an increase in the number of abortions. The Society of Family Planning, the report indicates from January to June 2024, the monthly average of abortions was nearly, guess how many it was? In a month. Now, today, with the thing that took place in New Orleans, everybody saying, oh, what a terrible thing. Okay. It was. People got killed. But how many abortions were performed on that very same day? Did anybody speak up for the innocent ones slaughtered? Huh? No. The average monthly abortion was nearly 98,000. That's over 3,000 abortions a day in America. Up from 88,000 in 2023 and 81,000 in 2022. Globally, the World Health Organization estimates that approximately 73 million induced abortions occurred each year. So you add it all up, and the slaughter is 200,000 a day. Then we have the problem of illegal immigration. You know why we have it? Because of abortion. We have it because God punishes us. Now, there are some people trying to reduce it, but are they going to get rid of it? Never. Okay? So let's come to Deuteronomy 28. We've been here before, and let's look at it, and let's see what we have, which is automatic. It's happened in the past. Were the 10 tribes of Israel cast out of their inheritance in the Middle East? Yes. Were the Jews cast out twice? Yes. And the second time, after rejecting the Messiah and saying, let his blood be on us and our children, they have been the most hated and victimized people on the face of the earth because it came out of their own mouth. So if any Jew is listening, think on that. Don't blame the one who persecutes you. Blame those who rejected Jesus when he was here and said, let his blood be on us and on our children. So what do? You need to come to God and repent like everybody else. All right, let's read what God says. First part talks all about the blessing. Everyone wants the blessing of this, the blessing of that. They want it everywhere. But we find that when we go against God, the blessings turn into punishments or curses. Okay? And then as that gets multiplied, here's what happens. Okay? Let's come here to verse 43. You can read the whole thing up to verse 43, but let's start here. The stranger dwelling among you shall get above you very high, and you shall come down very low. The election of Donald Trump slowed that down. Can they deport all of them? Probably not. What are you going to do? How do you stop that problem? Now, it would be a big job. Number one, cancel all funds to Planned Parenthoods with their temples to slaughter. Okay. Number two, outlaw all abortions. Number three, teach the laws of God everywhere. In government, in schools, in homes, in churches. Now, will they do that? You think they will? Huh? All those abortions? 200,000 a day in the world? 88,000 a month in America? We tell them, have all the sex you want and we'll take care of it. Okay? That never works. Hasn't worked from the first command in Genesis 2 that a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. Huh? All right. Stranger among you shall get above you very high, and you shall come down very low. And he shall loan to you, and you shall not loan to him. We're on the verge of losing everything with the dollar. We don't know if Trump can delay it or forestall it or change it, but sooner or later, all of the deficit spending going to catch up with us, and boom, it's going to affect everybody in the world and everybody in America. Okay? It's coming. He shall be the head and you shall be the tail. And all these curses shall come on you. Everyone listed ahead in the verses before this. And pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because, here's why. The laws of God work automatically. There's no way around it. Doesn't make a bit of difference. If a minister gets in a pulpit and says sweet nothings and lies, he knows better. Okay? We'll look at that in a minute. Overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Now, since God is God, every word that he says is true. Now, there are times when you emphasize certain words and certain things, but that doesn't exclude anything that God has said. Okay? Did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments. Now, for all of you who are hardcore evangelicals and do not believe in keeping the commandments of God, go get your Bible and read 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. All right? The one apostle that it says Jesus loved. And he explains about love and commandment keeping together. So those of you who keep Sunday, you are also part of the big problem that's happening in America. Now, I'll talk about the ministers here in a little bit. Did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you, okay, for your good, for your blessing, so that you would have peace, so that you would have health, so that you could have wealth, so that you could have children, so that you could enjoy them, so you could have a life that would be worth living. That's why God gave the commandments. But you hate the Sabbath. And you hate his holy days. But you love Sunday. And you love all of your holidays, which come from the cauldron of Satan, the devil. But you have so much fun. Oh, yes. Does Satan want you to be happy in sin? Oh, yes, as much as possible, until the punishment of God comes upon you and there's no other recourse. Think about that, okay? Now, he says this, don't think anybody can get away from it. Verse 46, for they shall be upon you for a sign and a wonder and on your seed forever, and was on the nations that were there that God kicked out of the Middle East to put in Israel and Judah, okay? And it applies to everyone. And we will see that today that is much more abundantly so than ever before. Verse 47, here's the reason, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. Question, has this nation had the abundance of all things? Huh? Yes, we have. But look at what we have turned out. Millions of homeless, millions of drug addicts, millions of abortions. Okay? Don't you think those sins rise to heaven? And don't you think God's hand is upon us? Now, there have been some who have turned back from the worst of them. So God honors that. But why not come back to God all the way? Why come back to God just enough and flatter him so that the pressure of these trials are relieved from you? See? That's not the answer. Now, let's read on and see what he says. Therefore, you shall serve your enemies, which the Lord shall send against you, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until you be destroyed. And the Lord shall bring a nation against you from far, from the end of the earth as the eagle flies. And that's not the Assyrian, because the Assyrian was always a neighbor north, okay? And Babylon was a neighbor east, not from the end of the earth. Today, that's China, and I'll read some things about that for you after the break. A nation whose language you do not understand. How many here understand Chinese? Huh? I know a little German. I know some Greek. I know English, but I don't know Chinese. And I look at their lettering and what they write, and I don't have a clue as to how they understand that. Right there it says, you shall not understand. A nation of fierce countenance, who shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. Okay? Then it gets on into the siege that's going to happen, where then cannibalism takes place. It's happened in the past. Now, what I suggest you do before we take a break, when you're watching television, go watch the program Unearthed, which is put out by Nat Geo and American History Channel. They show all the archaeological digs of Egypt. Where are they? They're gone. The Aztec, the Inca. Okay? Where are they? Countries of the Middle East. One of the greatest civilizations in the Orient was in Cambodia, with the temple and the city of Angkor. The greatest temple ever built by human beings. And what happened? Because of sin, because of going against the laws of God, as we have read here, because God judges all the nations, every one of these civilizations have failed because of sin, abortion, and child sacrifice. Every one of them. And what do you think abortion is today? Child sacrifice. Okay? Of a creation of God. You will all suffer the penalty from it. And it's going to be coming from so many sources on so many things that no physical hand is going to be able to hold it back. In the long run, not even Donald Trump. So let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back.